Loud.
It should already be installed, yeah. Unless it's on you to install one. Nope, you good. You good.
I'm gonna say, I hope you can just double check people how far they've gotten on this. I don't have a ton of stuff I want to do this morning because partly because there's always going to be the get ready phase, but
And anybody having any trouble at all? Yeah. You're fine. So. Oh, okay. Yeah. Like here. Yeah. Or just sign out. For Unity, yeah, for Unity, they have to create an account for their party. Or if they have an existing email, if they don't have anything, I mean, they really want it. Well, now, they should already have Unity, whatever. Oh. So, since the Unity thing they run into it. It should Unity already installed. I was gonna say Unity installed is, that's one thing we want to make sure here. Let's see.
yeah, they go 2022 on it, so.
It's fine, it maybe you didn't point out. No. I don't think we're going to. So, yeah. But I think that's. Yes. Oh, you want to grab so yeah, that's what I'm doing. It's like so gated to me. One summer or games in summer. And then that will be. We're using 6.3, right?
I think that anything that's at least 6 should, in fact, most versions will work, but I'm gonna say 6.1 and up should generally be fine.
They have to push it on.
Yeah, we want at least a 6.
Do anything.
Some of the script stuff won't necessarily work without at least 6.1.
So they want to install it?
If gonna say if you don't have any installs, then okay, 6.3 is fine.
A lot of people don't. You might want to install it.
Then let's get installed. I can
Okay.
talk while the installs are going.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that any installs that need to happen get going before, so that they have time to run while it's chit chatting.
Okay, you're off now. Okay.
Oh, you need
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's where you know.
A bunch of people are gonna need it there.
Yeah.
Anybody else problems? I know Microsoft is like, please scan this QR code. You're gonna have to. There's nothing we can do.
Yep.
Professor does. I'm but a lonely graduate student who has graduated.
You graduate?
I graduated.
Oh,
In December.
I
Just show up. Just show up.
I don't know.
No,
I don't know why you're here.
they're like, Dumpy, can you come in? Sure.
Very good.
Okay.
Got a good vibe.
I like that dude. And I died and they renamed that in my honor. The Duncan building, yeah, that's what I call it.
Oh, boy. Yep.
And one over here too.
I think I'm gonna be the scarce resource for a minute or two here.
They give us any admin. You don't like us? No. I mean, they like you enough to name the building after you.
You think it's funny? Like, I didn't do anything. They just rename it.
Did nothing to contribute to the building.
I was the last Becker student.
Oh,
The
yeah,
last one to have a full semester at Becker.
they're gonna name for one. It's all.
Should have got flat.
What?
Just the chunky stuff. Yeah. Yeah. One over here. Oh.
Just the end there. If we already have that. Ooh, like lots of.
Or is, oh, there's one over there, okay.
You're fine. You're good.
Did you already say it? Yeah, you're great. We want to really say, I know what really say, okay. I think as long as I will say, it's crap. So,
I mean, for now, 6.1, oh, it's probably fine. Yeah, for noon, it might not be, so. I forget, when did they phase it in the New England system?
Don't they, update the version that we need?
Not usually. I mean, for one thing, they only do any updates if we expressly, like we, the Becker faculty expressly tell them, hey, we want to switch to the new version. And I think, of course, they like return to default images periodically. So,
Anybody else having any problem? Or don't have Unity 6.0 or default? No?
okay, well,
Great.
I'm waiting for installs to run. I wanted to talk a little bit particularly about the term game engine. It's sort of migrated a little bit over the years to where we originally heard of it. Technically, if I'm being very particular, every game has an engine. Even if it is an engine that somebody wrote from scratch themselves in some programming language of their choice. Early games, that's generally what it was. And in fact, for the most part, the engine and the game content were wrapped around each other. They were very much like this. They were pretty inseparable from each other. Each game basically had its own unique engine that was directly tied to making its mechanics happen. The first times we really see someone talk about an engine as a separate thing is mid to late 90s, I'd say, when id Software starts sharing or allowing people to license the code for some of the 3D games that they've created, especially Doom and Quake originally. Up to this point, sometimes companies would, or programmers would reuse engine code that they'd written for another game and use it as a starting point so they didn't have to start from scratch. But it was still all very much, it was up to them. But as 3D programming became more popular and also was a lot more complicated, for a lot of companies, it turned out it was way easier to just use someone's code and fill in their own content. This is one of the reasons why we say game development is a data-driven development industry, is that most of the content reuses the same bits of code over and over again, but it has to be filled in with what are the maps, what are the textures, what are the models, what are the descriptions of the different guns. If I'm going off of those earlier, things like Quake. And you could reuse the code and just keep filling in blanks, basically. And a lot of that early engine development started because people would pick these games up and they would mod them. They would essentially just replace the data files with their own versions of levels and things like that. He was a graduate student at the time, rather famously picked up the code for, I believe it was Half-Life, and basically completely replaced all of the actual content to make what was at the time a pretty completely original version of asymmetrical team versus first-person shooter, which was called Counter-Strike, which eventually, one, turned into its own game, and two, last I knew, Minlay worked at Valve. So it worked out for him. Those early engines were still usually, mostly what they were was programming libraries. They were stuff that the people who were writing the code could basically plug into what they were doing so that they could just use the functions, use the routines and actions that the people who developed the engine had put in. So using them was still very, very technical. Over the last 20-ish years, maybe, the concept of the game engine has started to migrate into something specifically generic and kind of end user friendly. Most of the engines that we talk about when we say use a game engine or what engine do you use are things which are not only the engine, but usually also an editor of some kind, something which is specifically designed to try and make it as easy as possible to connect the assets, is what we usually call them, all of that data, room files and character files and sounds and textures and sprites and all of that stuff, connect them to the code and make it as easy as possible for the end user, so that while some programming is still required, it's kept to a minimum because there are fewer people who find that work easy and even fewer who are good at it, in my experience. It is a task I believe anyone can learn to do. Does seem to be harder for some people. It's just like, it would take me so much work to do this. I would rather go and do something else, which I think is more fun. So usually when we say game engine, they are very now end user focused. The point of an engine these days is to do all of the jobs that games pretty much all need to do with relatively few variations. How the game works with the computer to communicate with the user and to get input and also to display things. I don't have any clue what some yes. Is that packaging? Yeah. Okay. I have to. What could some of those jobs be? Do you have any notion in general terms. You know, I'm not looking for folks to pull out minute technical details. But problems that basically every game has to solve. And so it's fairly easy to use generalization. Here's a big one. Drawing 3D models onto a 2D screen. It's a pretty big job. It has a lot of different pieces. These days, large portions of that job are now dedicated to a piece of hardware that specifically does that. It's called a GPU. We've run into a minor wrinkle because it turns out that the people who want to train large language models found that GPUs are very, very good for that. They do a number of mathematical jobs, most of which are graphics oriented, and some of them are like matrix multiplication and things. And so all of the people who seem to think that ChatGPT will somehow become our benevolent robot overlord and usher in a new utopia, at least for them, have basically started buying up all of the GPUs as fast as possible and made it much harder for us to build computers and consoles at affordable prices, somewhat to our chagrin. There's going to be one winner from the AI race. NVIDIA. I can pretty much predict that. Somebody said, who makes the most money in Gold Rush? Whoever's selling shovels. Anyway, so 3D graphics, 2D graphics too. In fact, most 2D graphics engines are actually using the 3D graphics engine just to put a bunch of flat surfaces in and then have the same accelerated hardware layer all those 2D images together on top of each other, mask them and composite them and things like that. What are some other pieces of the process that pretty much every game is going to want somewhere? Yes. Say again? Physics and collisions. Yeah, that's the main function of the. I'm gonna say physics engine covers two things: motion and collisions. That's pretty much everything it's for. But it's a really big two things because almost all of our games, in fact, what we're going to be doing in a minute, is very centered around this. Any other?
Taking inputs and then also realizing when the game is open enough to accept input.
Gonna say that second one is technically there is in fact it is often fairly specifically handled, but yes, processing whatever the inputs are, whether it's keyboards, mice, controllers, joysticks, other human interface devices, things like that. Just being mindful of time. I'm going to go through a couple others real quick. Sound. Talking to a network for multiplayer games that are online. Not all of which are multiplayer. Sometimes you still need a server for things, EA Live services. Any other biggies I'm glossing over here?
Graphics.
First one. All right. So I'm going to start off. So the point of most of these engines is because a lot of that work is sort of generic, to have it all prepackaged up to make it relatively easy for us to get straight to it. And so, okay, that's fine. Scoot that. If you have some Unity installed at this point, when we generally create something is from this tab that says projects. Probably unsurprisingly, this blue button that says new project is our starting point if we're trying to create a new project. Not everything is that usefully labeled, but that one is. Now, Unity as an engine is designed for both 3D and 2D. At least this morning, I'm going to be sticking primarily with 2D because it's simpler. It's generally more straightforward to set things up, and there's fewer things that can get confused. So let's see. You are going to be looking probably either for Universal 2D or for 2D built-in render pipeline. Whichever one of these two ideally is already installed. I'm going to use Universal 2D, and you get to pick a name for your project. Unity by default will try to name it My Project or My Project X in parentheses because it already had something named My Project. One of the best things you can do for yourself is replace default names for things with names that are descriptive. I'm going to use the name a name here. I'm going to call it Physics Playground. You can call it that. You can call it something else. That first camp project, whatever works for you at this point. Whatever will help you remember what it is. Okay, yes, I'm going to leave Use AI Assistant unchecked. I don't even remember that being there. I think that popped up when Unity said it wanted to update itself.
Got to edit that.
See, the biggest reason AI is booming is because they keep infiltrating it into everything we use.
Unity, make me a video game.
Create project. Now this part's going to take us a second. So yes, the engine we're using here is Unity. It's been around probably for more than 15 years at this point because I was using it for my master's project in 2013, like 2013 or something. I don't know if it's 20 years yet. Somewhere in the 15 to 20 year range. Was originally developed in Europe. We see this in a couple of places where programming things have names like monobehavior, spelled I-O-U-R, instead of just I-O-R. Was originally also a platform for developing mobile games, primarily for the Macintosh. These days, it has spread out to a platform that runs on nearly anything. You can build mobile games on it, PC games. That's what we're going to be focusing on. You can build console games on it. What are some of the other widely used engine tools? Well, I'm waiting for this project to finish loading. Probably so are you. Yeah, and I saw a hand over there. Godot. Godot's a relatively new one. Godot has the virtue of being open source. So people can offer their own modifications to it. You can always download and build it. It has, as a consequence, become a lot more popular after Unity suggested that it was going to mess with its licensing and make it a lot more expensive for many of the developers who used it. Like all but the most minimally sized ones. They backed out of that, but a whole lot of people went, maybe we don't want to put everything at the mercy of Unity's business decisions, given that they are apparently questionable, and jumped ship. Godot will do both 2D and 3D. It emphasizes using a language of its own, which is kind of Pythonish, called GDScript. You can also plug a number of other languages into Godot and build for it that way. One other really big player, and then there's a number of other bit players. Yeah. Unreal Engine is the other really big engine for general third-party development. Pretty much all of these engines have at least some basic, more or less free agreement for intro developers, which is part of the reason that they are very popular these days. Some other, sometimes lesser used engines include the Crytek engine. I move in a crowd that uses one particular programming language, so a lot of them like Bevy, which is an engine written in Rust. But that's also one that's mostly for programmers rather than end users at the moment, although people are building editor tools and things to go with it. Any other biggies, oddball engines? Scratch is one that's used usually to teach game development to relatively young people, mostly younger than you guys, which also has sort of its own mini environment and things like that. Those are some of the Those are some of the best known ones.
I know the Decima engine has been seeing some light recently.
Which?
Decima?
Decima?
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember basically Hideo Kojima got the engine, like a USB drive with the engine from some studio that were using it, but I don't remember any of their games that were popular enough to like put the Decima engine out there. But then he made Death Stranding 1 and 2 that both use Decima, and now
Now a bunch of people went, oh, this is awesome. Maybe we can use this.
yeah.
Game Maker Studio and Game Maker Studio 2.
Yeah, I mean, the many generations of Game Maker, that's the first engine that I taught anybody with. Game Maker is also intended to be very accessible because it lets you program your game logic primarily using little tile actions that you can stack together instead of having to write out any significant amount of code syntax. So I don't have a lot of time here, but fortunately the jobs that I'm going to do are going to be relatively small. Once we have a project like this,
Does anybody not have a project opening or opened already that needs help figuring out how to do it?
always a good thing. Confirm. Is this closed by control somewhere?
Yeah,
Because
okay.
I strongly suspect that people are going to be getting very backlit here and not going to be able to see anything.
No one?
People are doing okay?
Press a bunch of buttons.
Excellent. That was easy.
It may take a while. Unity is kind of bloated and slow.
You can. I learned after a while that you can actually do things like cut out the 3D code from your like the 3D physics engine from your build if you're not using 3D anywhere. Now, the thing that generally makes games interesting is that stuff happens, right? They're interactive. Ideally, stuff happens that you can control. We'll be getting to that in the afternoon. The easiest way to make stuff happen is somebody mentioned physics and collisions. We can start building some stuff like that into things more or less right away. So I'm going to start with some of that. But in order to see what's going on, we need some images. So the very first thing we're going to do is an asset import. I went and picked out a collection earlier this morning. I think you can either save it from here. Actually, yeah, it doesn't show you the link, but you should be able to download it directly from here. That is basically just sort of a collection of different, primarily circle images. Okay, I guess open media link, visit site. Yeah, it just shows me the image here. And save image as. So in my case, I'm just going to save it to my downloads folder. It's a PNG. Unity will import images in almost any format, reasonably known format that you want to use. But I do not tend to like GIF or GIF, whichever you prefer to call it, because it has relatively limited color. And I do not particularly care for JPEG because it is lossy. And I think most people tend to operate on the same basis. Some people, occasionally you will find projects that use TGA, which is a very old image file format, but it's well suited for textures. So sometimes people still use it. Occasionally people will be using BMP. So I've saved that to my downloads folder. And to be able to actually use it in Unity. So in order to find this, it's in the file sharing channel on our Discord. And then there's a thread here, which is basically my resources for, I meant to actually rename the thread. I can do that in a bit. But, and so this image, which if you can copy or save it directly, great. Otherwise, you can open it in a browser and save it to your disk. And then I just need my project. And in your default layout, there's a section down here that says project and console. And if you need to, just make sure the project is in the front. You'll usually see a few default things like scenes and settings, stuff like that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an Explorer window, go to my downloads folder where I downloaded it. Yours could potentially be somewhere else. So then I can just take this, I can drag it into this project window. And it shows up over here. And in some cases, it may be smart. In this case, it has already identified that this contains a whole bunch of simple mini images. When you have when you have one image file and it contains a whole bunch of different images, either that represent different things or that represent different appearances for the same thing, like different frames of an animation, there's a term we use for it. You might already be familiar with it. Anyone know? Anyone familiar with the term? Call it a sprite sheet. And it generally combines an image together with the information about what is what. If you can't flip this arrow open and see a bunch of different things, then you may have to highlight this and check your stats here, basically. Make sure that it's texture type sprite, that it's sprite mode multiple. And when you say open sprite editor, you see it puts these faint gray boxes around anything. You might have to go to slice, automatic, and hit slice. But it's also possible that it will have already figured out that this was what you wanted to do and popped it up for you. One other thing I will need to check, but I'm not going to know for sure until I drop something in here and see it. So I am going to pick one of these circular things like this one. And I'm going to drag it out somewhere inside this box. This box is my camera view. I can also take a peek at it either by clicking at the game tab or by looking at my main camera here in the hierarchy, in which case I will usually get a little preview window. Shows me what the camera looks like while I'm editing.
But does anybody not have the image that watching? Okay, so you may not have it, but
And say, does Unity know WebP?
it does not.
I would have been mildly surprised. It would be I mean, even the browsers barely like WebP.
Anyone with the pages on?
Logins, yeah.
All right. Now I'm going to use two different kinds of sprites here. I'm going to start off with sort of a little pinball / Plinko kind of thing, just because it will be very, very easy to see stuff happening almost right away. So I'm also going to pick like one of these like disk style guys, and I'm going to drag this out here. Unity organizes your game project into what are called scenes, which are basically collections of objects. You can unload scenes, you can load in new ones. And then the objects are the things that people see that interact with each other. Objects are also made up of components. Components decide things like what the object looks like, where it is, and how it interacts. So both of these components have something called a sprite renderer. That was automatically created when I dragged the sprite into the window. And what it does is it just has a link to one particular sprite out of this sheet, and it draws it into the window. And before I do anything else, so I have just a couple of these guys. If I want to rearrange or edit things, we get these tools on the side in our scene window. And I'm going to pick this little 4-way arrow thing, which says Move Tool. You highlight it. When I do this, I get arrows for moving this thing around on X, Y. Like your math class, X is horizontal, large X values to the right, small x values to the left, large y values towards the top, small y values toward the bottom. I'm going to make sure that this thing is sitting on here. And then I can test things out by pressing this play button at the top. Yes. A few people have been running into the same issue. I'm guessing one of these folks will be able to walk you through it in just a second. Image import. I'm guessing probably the same WebP issue that.
All right, anybody else that's having troubles with the image and getting it into Unity? Oh, so I think the assets is right here. So you just arrow and you all right here. Yeah.
All right. When you've built some kind of scene and you want to see how it works, you can test it out in Unity just by pressing this play button at the top. Your window will change over to show a view of what it looks like. Now, right now, it is not going to do a lot. I mean, first you may get a little build window. Right now, it just has the two things that I built, and they do nothing except be circles. And that's all I've asked them to do so far. It's not, nothing's broken here. We just haven't done much yet. So if you want to use physics on stuff, there are two different physics engines, one for physics 2D and one for physics 3D. I'm going to start with 2D just like I've been doing with everything else. You can mix and match 3D physics with 2D visuals and vice versa. But then, you know, some games do that on purpose, but then stuff can get funky. The way to add physics to things is by adding a new component besides like the renderer component. Usually a couple. And I can do that a couple ways. I can say add component in this inspector window, which shows me things about whichever object is selected over here and over here. I can also go to this component menu, pick something out. So in this case, I'm going to go to physics 2D, and I'm going to pick rigid body 2D. This is the thing that makes stuff move. This is the thing that makes physics things happen, is for there to be a rigid body on stuff. By default, I'm going to be okay with the base settings that it has on here, but you can control lots of stuff about the physics over here. And then there is, and at this point, if I press play, I should see my little guy that I just put the rigid body on fall down to the center of the earth eventually. I'm not going to see it again at this point. It's not coming back. I'm going to stop. That will reset everything to the way it was. If I want it to do something else on the way, I need to tell them that I want them to collide. Rigid bodies like have mass and are affected by forces, but without collision, the only force that is likely to affect them is gravity, which defaults to Earth-style gravity. So if I want this thing to collide with things, I need what is called a collider. There are several. I'm going to go to add component this time. It gives you a list of components you can filter. So for instance, if I type COL or COLL, it's going to only show me things that say colliders. I'm looking for the colliders that have 2D on the end. And in this case, because it's a circle, I'm going to pick circle collider 2D. And now it tells me some things, which again, we can leave alone for the moment. The other thing that happens is now if I zoom in on this, I should be able. I should have brought my mouse. I'll bring my mouse after this class. A lot of navigation in Unity is way easier if you have a middle mouse button. And I did not, come on, not that one, this one. Oh, I'm trying to zoom in close enough. You can barely see it on my screen. You might be able to see it more easily on yours. There's a thin green circle that's been mixed in here. If I uncheck the circle box next to circle collider, it will disappear and come back. One collider doesn't do anything because what can it collide with? Nothing. The whole purpose of colliders is that they determine when things overlap or touch in some way. I'm going to pick the other one. The other one, that's the same one. And I'm not going to add a rigid body to this one, at least right away, but I am going to add a collider. When you do that, Unity considers it what is called a static body or a static collider. It is an immovable object at this point. Other things that hit it will just stop or bounce off. Nothing that hits it can push it. There are no irresistible forces in Unity, but there are immovable objects. At this point, when I hit this, it goes bonk, falls off to the side, and then disappears down to the center of the earth. So, I'm going to do one last thing, and then I'm going to turn you guys loose for a few minutes, which is that I can, if I want to adjust how much bounce there is, you can do that by applying what is called a physics material. This decides things like how hard does it drag, how much does it bounce, is there friction, things like that. So if I want to create a new asset for something like this, I can do a few things. I can click this plus tab over in the project menu. I can right click here in the project menu and go to this create menu. Or I can go to the assets and go to the create menu. All of these will show me the same list of stuff. All of it shows me the same list of things. So once you have this menu through one way or another of these, you can go to 2D and you go down to physics material 2D. And when you click that, it's going to ask you for a name for it. So I'm going to call this bouncy. And once I have this little tennis ball thing in here and I have it selected, I can see a small number of things over here. So for bounce, I'm going to leave friction alone. We're not too worried about friction. But for bounciness, I am going to put it up to something like 0.5. It doesn't take much. 1, if you put in 1, that is perfectly bouncy. Things bounce off going like the opposite direction just as hard as they were going when they arrived. If you go to 0.5, that means they bounce half as much as they hit with. You can put it to 2, in which case things that bounce off will be going twice as fast after they bounce as when they started. You can make flubber. That's probably a really dated reference. But normally that will cause your game to get out of hand in a big hurry unless something else helps slow stuff down again. And then the only other question is bounce combine. And if I have it at maximum, that's what it defaulted to. Once I have that, I can go to my rigid body 2D. And if you see here, there's a bit where it says material. By default, it says none. I can take this bouncy and I can drag it in there. So you see now it says that. What? Oh. And when I do this now, heavy T-storms today. Say it needs to think about things for a second. It bounces a little more. I could turn it up if I want to. So last thing I want to do is I want to give you folks, we don't have a lot of time, like 5 minutes or something. Because one of the other things you can do at this point is you can just take these and you can duplicate them. You can hit Control-D, or you can go to the game object menu, and I think edit and duplicate is down there, same thing. And that will allow you, once you've done that, to just drag these guys around. In particular, if you duplicate the static ones, you can just sort of sprinkle them all over the place. They will start out being wherever the one that you duplicated was. And so just take a couple minutes. You can pick some of the other circle sprites and put them in and turn them into bodies if you want to, or you can just sprinkle stuff around and just make kind of a pinball setup for these guys to bounce their way down on their way past. So we've got a couple of minutes for folks to be able to play with that. And then after lunch, I will have some stuff that people can use to start making things like this interactive. But for the moment, anybody runs into any questions or stucks, we have a couple of minutes. I can help, your TAs can help. And then you'll be ready to move on to 203 in a couple of minutes. Yes.
What? You not have the image? Yeah.
Come on in. See if it's the same. I'm gonna say 0.5 was not as bouncy as I wanted. I think I'm gonna turn it up to 0.75. Better. Actually, that's what I should do while I have a couple minutes. I should go. Oh, my mouse is gonna be right here. Is it? Is it? Yeah, I don't even know how I can get them from my office. Because I think my other mouse is hooked up to my Steam Deck at home right now. So, okay.
Okay, that looks like it's time. Make sure to save your projects, close everything out, and log out of the computers, please. You don't have to log out of like your Unity account or anything. Those are saved to your like whatever account, but just make sure everything else is logged out. And I don't know what room. I think you're going to 202.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. They moved.
Yeah.
Bentley is going to be in 202 today, not 203.
Yeah.
But it is probably time to save stuff. If you close Unity, it will ask you if you want to save. It's up to you, but I would recommend it. Saves you redoing this work later for other things. And make sure you log out. And I'll see folks after lunch.
PM sessions. Sorry,
I believe today there's PM sessions
Yeah.
on like after Wednesday, they'll start using afternoons for studio time.
And open the outs, so I think that makes dinner. Which is just a big word for it. Do whatever you want. Yeah. Usually there's to be work on game time for students. That's what after Wednesday. You can maybe that 2 or 3 companies that doesn't work in here.
There are.
Yeah.
That just do not work.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's cool.
But that's what I'm looking forward to. We
So
have
the kids
more
so much to be here.
students. Yeah, that's why we say.
Oh, actually,
They pay out.
That's for, well, not. Not because. I mean, they're not. They're also a little biased that they're getting.
Now, ideally, they shouldn't have to end up having to install Unity,
It should be.
but they'll still probably have to sign in. Then I can zap this whole thing.
All right, go ahead and log into the computers and then I'm getting started making the accounts.
Yeah.
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 All right. There should be a thing on your desktop that says Unity Hub. Double click that to open it. If it pops up with Autodesk, close that.
Thinking.
Once it's open, hit sign in. Actually, don't hit sign in. Create account because you don't have account yet.